Hello, Taylor Elwood here with Sovereign Submission. I am the sovereign coach for submissive men who want to fully claim and live their life. And today I want to talk about a submission myth that I encountered yesterday, actually, in a cohort with other men. I had introduced myself and had shared that I was a coach for submissive men. And later on, one of the men had or apparently had a reaction to it. And one of the things that he reacted to was this idea that submission and nice guy behaviors were one and the same, and that a submissive man was a passive man. And I thought it was a really fascinating example of how we can build faulty ideas into an experience that aren't true. And so I'm going to unpack that today and also talk a bit about the importance of why it's important to claim your voice as a submissive, whether you're a man or a woman. And welcome, Michelle. Glad to have you here. Feel free to drop a comment in or a question at any time. So I used to be a nice guy, and I want to define what a nice guy is before we get into like the difference between that and submission. So a nice guy is a man who is codependent and people pleasing, and he has covert contracts. And what do I mean by covert contracts? I mean that he will, for example, have this contract in his mind where he'll be like, if I mow the lawn, clean the dishes, cook the meal, then she's going to have sex with me. Now, this is true for a lot of men, whether they whether they have a submissive desire or not. This is true for a lot of men where they have nice guy behaviors. And I used to be a nice guy in some ways. I would never say that I was a full-on nice guy because I could speak up for some things, but I abandoned myself a lot as well. I didn't always honor my deepest truths or my sovereignty, and that's an important aspect that we're going to get into here. I didn't speak up when I needed to a lot of the time. And so I was a nice guy because I was abandoning myself and I wasn't respecting myself in the process. And I was actually very passive as a nice guy because I was trying to get someone else's approval. And I was also hoping that if I did certain things, I would get something in return. In my particular case, I wasn't really so much worried about sex. I never had a problem ever in terms of that particular issue. But a lot of times what I was hoping for was that, that I would get certain lifestyle choices that I wanted honored instead of just being honest about those lifestyle choices. And so what ended up resulting was that I would end up going behind the back of my partner. And this was my second wife, and we didn't have a DS dynamic. But that was something I wanted. And there were other things I wanted. But I wasn't being honest about it with her. And so that to me is an example of passivity, and that's nice guy behavior. So you might say, okay, well, how is that different from being a submissive man? Well, what I've discovered myself as I've submitted deeper and deeper and learned to go into submission more is that submission requires a level of self-respect and sovereignty, and it requires the ability to speak up so that she can feel you. What I've noticed is that a lot of men will not speak up for what they want because they're afraid of losing the relationship, or they're afraid that she'll get angry and they don't know how to handle her anger. And so they end up abandoning themselves. The problem is she gets angry anyway because she can tell when they have abandoned themselves. Any woman who's been with a man knows when that man has abandoned himself, and it doesn't make her happy. She would rather have a man who had a firm awareness of his boundaries and stood up for himself instead of abandoning himself. Because when he abandons himself, he's showing her that he doesn't really have what it takes to fully handle her. He doesn't have her. And here's the interesting thing that I've observed, and this is true whether this is true regardless of what the relationship dynamic is. A woman wants to know that her man has her, even a submissive man. She wants to know that he has the confidence and presence and groundedness that he has her no matter what's going on, that he's got her, that she can fully lean in to and feel safe. Because when she feels safe, that's when she feels sexual. When she feels safe, that's when she can open up. When she feels safe, that's when the creative divinity of the feminine goes through her. And men, no matter what your dynamic is, crave that deep desire for the divine feminine. Submissive men in particular understand that to kneel to the divine feminine and surrender to her is to be initiated by her into the creative potential. This is why submissive men want to submit. In my experience, what I've discovered is that there is a deeper layer of creativity discovered through the act of submission. And nonetheless, a submissive man has to be able to be grounded in himself and embodied in himself as a man in order for her to fully feel and trust his submission. This is where a lot of submissive men necessarily need to explore their own relationship around submission. Welcome, Ray. Glad to have you here. Feel free to leave a comment or ask a question. So what I mean by that is that, one of the questions that is at the heart of being a submissive man is, how do I submit and still respect myself? How do I submit and still have a sense of connection with myself as a man? And it probably doesn't help that in some ways there are a lot of definitions of masculinity that emphasize the need for men to quote unquote take the lead or be dominant or take charge. What I share though, when I work with my clients and on here as well, is that it is possible to submit and respect yourself. In fact, it actually is essential. You cannot fully step into submission if you are not in touch with your own inner sovereign. And it's not about dominating yourself or being in control of yourself. It's about being in touch with your desires, your wants and needs from a place of genuine respect and care and love. A submissive man takes care of himself and he takes care of the dynamic by learning how to be fully in touch with what he wants and speaks up for it. Now, on January 22nd, I'm going to actually be, and I'm going to plug this right now. I have a class coming up. I'm going to put the link in here under the message, and it'll be in the show notes as well, called "Speak So She Can Feel You." And this class is all about helping men have hard conversations. Because one of the reasons that men abandon themselves is they don't always know how to have the hard conversation. Whether it's bringing up a desire that you have, or it's encountering her unhappiness, resentment, or anger, and not knowing what to do in the face of that. A lot of men will abandon themselves in an effort to try and stay safe. This is essentially the problem of the nice guy. We talked about covert contracts earlier. So why does a nice guy have a covert contract? Well, part of it is he wants something, so it is transactional, but part of it is also he's trying to keep himself safe. Welcome, Brendan. Glad to have you here. And feel free to drop a comment or leave a question. So fundamentally, a nice guy, he has his covert contracts, but he's doing it in part to keep himself safe. The problem is it's not keeping him safe. It's endangering himself. It's endangering his partner, his wife, his dominant. It's endangering the relationship. Because what we do not speak to is what defines the relationship until it is spoken. So when you are a man who is operating in shadow, you are operating from a place where you're keeping what you desire and want to yourself. It comes at the cost of the relationship itself at some point. And I say this as a man who's done that. I was married for 10 years, and at some point, the guilt and the shame and everything else added up, and the relationship went away because everything that I had been doing in shadow came out. And not even in a way where it was necessarily like obvious to everyone, but it came out in a way for me where I finally had to kind of come face to face and confront the way that I had been living my life and recognize that I had fundamentally abandoned myself. I'd gotten caught up in porn and and I had gotten caught up in and basically had some sex addiction issues and things along those lines. And a lot of it was also me being run by my fear and anxiety. Not even about being caught, but more along the lines of like, like I was numbing myself out and looking for love and respect and everything else in all the wrong places. And I'm not making any excuses for myself when I share any of this with you. These are hard learned lessons, but this is one of the reasons why I think it's so important for a man to speak up for what he genuinely wants and needs and desires. Because when he stops operating from shadow and starts speaking up for what he genuinely wants, it changes things. So a submissive man cannot be a passive man. A nice guy can be a passive man and often is. He's passive in a lot of ways. He doesn't have the inner discipline or control of himself to actually acknowledge what he truly wants. He might even be in denial of it. And even if he isn't in denial of it, he's operating in shadow. He's acting out sideways. And as I shared before, it catches up to him. But a submissive man necessarily needs to be in touch with what he genuinely wants. And so this is why learning these skills around having hard conversations is so important. Because when we learn how to have hard conversations, we build the resilience toward being able to speak up for what we need, want, and desire. We're not being passive at that point. And let me be clear, as a submissive man myself, just because I speak up for something that I want doesn't mean I'm automatically going to get it. Part of the dynamic is that we end up exploring what that want is and discussing what that looks like, but we also value the safety of the relationship itself. I got into a conversation yesterday with my beloved mistress, and one of the things that was brought up was how something that had been shared recently did not make her feel fully safe. And at the same time, as I shared with her in response, I said, I fully acknowledge that and I received it. And I said, and if I didn't say it, it would be there between us anyway. But by saying it, at least it's there and we can address it together. And we did. We are finding a way to address that together and creating a deeper sense of connection and safety. That's the thing I think that a lot of times we forget. Like I don't think a relationship should always be comprised of hard relationships. I want to be very clear about that. If a relationship is hard most of the time, that's actually a signal right there that there's probably some deeper problems that need to be addressed. And they may even be problems that make that relationship unsalvageable. It's really important that we honor and are aware of ourselves. Like, how much are we willing to really take on? And at the same time, I think one of the most important definitions that I've discovered around hard conversations is that, and relationships, is that a truly safe relationship is a relationship where the people come out the other side and they are through a rough time and they are still okay together. They are still together. They are still okay, and they are in a healthy place where they're not avoiding each other. They're not disassociating from each other, and they're not disassociating from themselves. They have respect for themselves. Does that make sense? Let that land for a moment with you. So if you're a submissive man that's watching this, or a man who's curious about submission, or you're just a man who wants to get better at hard conversations, regardless of what your dynamic is, I do have a class that's happening on January 22nd. I'm going to post the link in the chat here again. And for those on YouTube, it'll be up at the top. And this class is all about learning how to build the resilience in yourself to have the conversations. Because when we learn how to have the conversations and we learn how to ground ourselves in our body and to be fully comfortable in our body, so that even when we feel activated in the moment, we take a deep breath and then take a moment and soothe ourselves and regulate ourselves and then continue to have the conversation. This is what leads to genuine connection and intimacy. This is what leads to safety. We might not feel safe in the moment of the conversation, but we feel safe afterwards because we know we can have the conversation, as opposed to staying silent all the time and not feeling safe at all, but trying to be safe, which is what nice guys do. You know, a nice guy will try to stay safe by not saying anything, but it comes at the cost of his integrity. It comes at the cost of his respect. It comes at the cost of the relationship itself. So if you're watching this and this is landing with you, check out what I've shared. January 22nd, it's going to be a live class. And this is an opportunity to learn and build these skills so that you can have the conversations and come out the other side okay. And if anything, come out the other side in even closer contact and connection with each other. And stop avoiding the conversations that matter. That's what I'm going to finish with here. Stop avoiding the conversations that matter. Because the conversations that matter are what define the relationship and create the erotic devotion and service on the part of the submission. And on the part of the mistress, the dominant, it creates her ability to lean fully into her own creative flow and to bring it forth. But to do it from a place of sovereignty. We're both in sovereignty with each other. That's the interesting thing. A submissive man doesn't give up his sovereignty when he submits. He doesn't give up his respect. If anything, he deepens into it because he actually owns and acknowledges what he truly wants instead of continuing to live a compromised life, which is what so many men do. So thank you for watching. This show will go up in a little bit here since it was live, and check out the class.